The sweet scent of vanilla and warm sugar usually felt like a comforting hug around Diana Reed. In her cozy French Quarter shop, Diana's Sweet Nothings, she meticulously piped swirls of buttercream onto a fresh batch of red velvet cupcakes, her hands moving with practiced grace. But today, the familiar aroma felt heavy, almost suffocating. The whispers she'd overheard earlier still echoed in her ears. Hushed concerns about rising rents, dwindling profits, the fragile state of small businesses like hers. She tried to push the anxieties away, focusing on the delicate work, but her gaze kept drifting towards the window. Next door, on the building owned by her kindly landlord, Mr. Dubois, a stark "for sale" sign mocked her precarious peace. What would happen to her lease if the building sold? What would happen to her? Later, after the last customer had left and the afternoon sun began to dip, painting the street in shades of orange and violet, Diana found herself hunched over her small, cluttered desk. She nervously clicked through her online banking, the numbers on the screen doing little to soothe her. The debt wasn't catastrophic, not yet, but it was a constant, nagging weight, a silent threat to her dreams. With a sigh, she reached for an old, dented flower tin tucked away in the back of a cabinet. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. She pulled it out, a small, tarnished ring box. The sight of it made her stomach clench, a familiar wave of humiliation washing over her. It was a relic from her teenage years, a foolish, heartfelt gesture to the older man she had adored, Gabriel Moretti. He had rejected her so gently, so firmly that day, his words polite, but his message clear. Her feelings were a childish joke. The memory still made her flinch, a raw ache in her chest, a silent yearning for a love that would never treat her heart as a fleeting amusement. She quickly shoved the box back, closing the tin with a decisive snap, as if she could seal away the past. It was getting dark. Time to close up. As she locked the front door, the click echoing in the quiet street, a sleek black car, impossibly dark and polished, purred to a stop directly in front of her shop. Her breath caught. This wasn't a tourist's rental. This car exuded power, wealth, and something else. A dangerous authority. The driver's door opened, and a figure unfolded from the luxurious interior. Tall, imposing. Every line of his expensive suit screamed ruthlessness, a storm of power in human form. Even in the dimming light, Diana recognized him instantly. A cold shock stealing through her veins. Gabriel Moretti. He hadn't just aged, he had sharpened. The boyish charm she remembered was gone, replaced by a chiseled intensity that made her feel impossibly small, impossibly vulnerable. His eyes, the same piercing grey she remembered, swept over her, lingering for a fraction of a second on the faint smudge of icing on her cheek. A ghost of a memory. Perhaps, or perhaps just a possessive assessment. He was here, and his presence, even before a single word was spoken, felt like an earthquake in the quiet heart of her world. He was here to acquire the entire block. She just knew it. His gaze was a physical weight, pinning her to the spot, making her suddenly aware of the vast difference in their worlds, their very beings. He was a force, and she was just Diana, the baker with a smudge of icing and a heavy heart. The moment Gabriel Moretti stepped into Diana's Sweet Nothings, the cozy warmth of her shop seemed to shrink, swallowed by his imposing presence. He didn't just walk, he commanded the space. His broad shoulders and formidable height casting long shadows across her pastel walls and cheerful displays. Diana felt a prickle of unease, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool New Orleans air. He moved with the quiet power of a predator, his expensive suit a dark, unyielding silhouette against the setting sun filtering through her front window. His eyes, those same piercing grey eyes she remembered, swept over her shop, a possessive assessment in their depths that made her breath catch. He paused by the counter, his gaze lingering on a display of lemon tarts, but his attention was clearly on her. "I've acquired the building next door," he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and directly into her chest. It wasn't a question, but a declaration. "The entire block is next, including your lease." Diana's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands, still faintly dusted with flour, clenched into fists. "My shop isn't for sale, Mr. Moretti," she managed, her voice sounding ridiculously small, a defiant squeak against the weight of his authority. She tried to project confidence, but inside she felt like a tiny bird caught in the shadow of a hawk. Before Gabriel could reply, the bell above the door chimed, announcing another arrival. A man with an easy smile and impeccably tailored clothes stepped inside. "Diana, my dear, just the woman I wanted to see." It was Julian, the charming investor she'd met last week, who had shown genuine interest in her unique recipes and offered a partnership. He moved towards her with a warmth that was a stark contrast to Gabriel's icy presence. "I was just outlining some incredible possibilities for expansion. Your talent deserves a wider audience." Julian's smile was infectious, and for a fleeting moment Diana felt a genuine blush creep up her cheeks. She found herself laughing, a bright, unburdened sound, as he playfully gestured towards her cupcake display. The anxiety of moments before seemed to recede, replaced by a hopeful flutter. But then she felt it, a shift in the air, an almost palpable tightening around Gabriel. His gaze, which had been fixed on her, now flickered to Julian, and Diana saw it. A flash of something possessive, something feral, that made the blood drain from her face. It was jealousy, raw and untamed, igniting in his eyes as he watched her smile at another man. The brief warmth Julian had brought was instantly extinguished by the sudden, chilling intensity emanating from Gabriel. "The lady is not looking for partners," Gabriel cut in, his voice a low growl that halted Julian mid-sentence. The authority in his tone was absolute, brooking no argument. He stepped closer to Diana, effectively putting himself between her and Julian, a silent, powerful barrier. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulling out a thick stack of papers. He laid them on the counter, pushing them towards Diana. "I've settled your outstanding debts," he stated, his eyes boring into hers. "Every last one, and your lease is now secured, under my company's name." Diana stared at the documents, then back at him, her mind reeling. Her bakery, her future, her very existence in this quarter now technically belonged to him. He hadn't asked, he hadn't offered a choice. He had simply acted, his power so vast, so undeniable, that resistance seemed futile, even foolish. "You will work for me now, Diana," he continued, his voice softer this time, but no less commanding, "and you will do so under my protection." Julian, looking stunned and utterly outmatched, stammered a hasty apology and backed out of the shop, the bell above the door a mournful chime of his retreat. Diana was left alone with Gabriel, the silence in the shop thick with his dominance. She felt trapped, completely cornered, yet a strange, almost dizzying sense of calm began to settle over her. The crushing weight of her debts, the fear of losing her shop, it was all gone, replaced by a new, overwhelming reality, his reality. She had no choice in the matter, but looking into his unyielding eyes, seeing the quiet promise of his words, she felt an undeniable, primal sense of safety. He had claimed her, and in his formidable shadow, she knew she would be protected. The gleaming, sterile expanse of stainless steel and polished granite was a far cry from the flour-dusted comfort of Diana's sweet nothings. Gabriel Moretti hadn't just moved her bakery, he had transplanted it, root and stem, into a meticulously renovated space within his brooding riverfront high-rise, just a few floors below his penthouse. Her cozy, familiar world of mismatched teacups and worn wooden counters was gone, replaced by a stark, modern domain that hummed with quiet power. Diana felt like a stray blossom pressed between the pages of a cold, expensive book. She had tried, of course, to assert herself. "My shop still has customers, Mr. Moretti," she'd said, her voice attempting to be firm, though it trembled slightly under the weight of his gaze. "I need to maintain my presence there." He had simply looked at her, those piercing grey eyes unwavering, and the sheer force of his presence had silenced her. "Proximity is non-negotiable, Diana," he'd stated, his voice a low, unyielding command. "For your safety, under my direct supervision." There had been no room for argument, no space for her small defiance. His will was absolute, and she, a tiny baker caught in his powerful orbit, had no choice but to yield. Now her days were structured by his unspoken rules. Her schedule, once fluid and dictated by the whims of dough and rising sugar, was now a precise timetable. Her movements within the building were tracked, not overtly, but she felt the invisible threads of his security measures, the subtle knowing glances from his staff. Even who she spoke to seemed to be implicitly managed. If a new face lingered too long, or a conversation strayed from business, she would feel the prickle of awareness, the unspoken question in the air, a phantom weight of his possessive gaze. He called it business protocol, security measures, but to Diana it felt like an invisible fence confining her, yet strangely protecting her too. He had provided her with an apartment in the same building, just a few floors above her new kitchen. It was lavish, with panoramic views of the city, exquisitely furnished and utterly impersonal. The silken sheets, the gleaming marble, the art that adorned the walls, it was all beautiful, expensive, and not hers. It felt like a gilded cage, a testament to his power, yet a constant reminder of her newfound lack of true freedom. She could look out at the bustling city, the vibrant life of New Orleans, but she could not truly be a part of it without his tacit approval. Despite the initial unease, the feeling of being uprooted and controlled, Diana couldn't deny the tangible benefits. The crushing weight of her debts, which had once felt like a physical burden on her shoulders, was gone, erased. The equipment in her new kitchen was state-of-the-art, a dream come true for any baker, making her work smoother, more efficient. And slowly, subtly, a quiet sense of security began to settle within her. She was safe, utterly, undeniably safe. No more worries about rising rents, no more late nights poring over ledgers, no more fear of losing the one thing she had built. Gabriel Moretti had absorbed all her burdens into his vast, formidable empire. His intense focus on her, while initially unnerving, had also started to feel like something else, something she hadn't realized she craved. In his demanding control, in his unyielding presence, she felt seen, cared for, in a way that made the golden cage feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. He was her protector, and she, despite herself, was beginning to lean into the undeniable strength of that fact. Days bled into weeks, each one a subtle shift in Diana's perception of her new reality. Her world now consisted of the hum of state-of-the-art ovens, the rhythmic beat of Gabriel Moretti's high-rise, and the stark contrast between her gentle art of baking and the ruthless business empire that thrummed just floors above. She was a small, soft island in a sea of hard edges and unyielding power. Gabriel had a habit of appearing unannounced. One moment Diana would be meticulously weighing flour, lost in the quiet concentration of her craft, and the next, a shadow would fall across her workstation. She would look up, her heart giving a startled lurch, to find him there. He never spoke immediately, simply watched her, his piercing grey eyes taking in every detail of her movements, the smudge of flour on her cheek, the precise curl of an icing swirl. His presence was a palpable weight, an intensity that made her both nervous and, strangely, a little warm. He demanded perfection in her work, a silent expectation that pushed her to excel, yet he also meticulously ensured her comfort, from the ergonomic design of her new kitchen to the quality of the ingredients delivered daily. She found herself, almost instinctively, beginning to look to him, not for permission, Not exactly, but for a subtle nod of approval, a flicker in his gaze that conveyed satisfaction. It was a new, unsettling dependence, one she hadn't known she was capable of. The true test came with a supplier issue. A crucial order of specialty vanilla beans, essential for a large event, was delayed, then incorrectly fulfilled. Diana, still clinging to a thread of her former independence, tried to handle it herself. She spent hours on the phone, her voice growing increasingly frustrated as she navigated unhelpful customer service and bureaucratic red tape. The problem escalated, threatening to derail the entire order. She felt the familiar knot of panic tightening in her stomach, the old dread of her precarious business life creeping back in. Just as she was about to admit defeat, Gabriel appeared in the doorway of her kitchen. He must have sensed her distress, or perhaps his security had simply flagged an extended, agitated phone call. He didn't ask. He just took the phone from her hand, his fingers brushing hers, sending a jolt through her. His voice, when he spoke into the receiver, was a low, dangerous rumble, utterly devoid of emotion, yet radiating an undeniable threat. Diana watched, mesmerized, as the unseen person on the other end of the line crumbled. Gabriel didn't raise his voice, didn't resort to yelling. He simply laid out the consequences, the sheer weight of his authority settling over the situation like a shroud. Within minutes, the issue was resolved. The correct vanilla beans would be on a private jet, delivered directly to her kitchen within hours. It was terrifyingly efficient. He hung up, placing the phone back on its hook, his eyes turning to her. "You took an unnecessary risk, Diana," he stated, his tone firm, demanding. There was no anger, but a possessive concern laced his words, an unspoken reprimand for putting herself in a position of vulnerability. "Your time is too valuable for such trivialities. Bring these matters to me." She nodded, unable to speak, a wave of relief washing over her so profound it left her weak. The sheer power of him, the effortless way he had obliterated her problem, was overwhelming. She had tried to be strong, to handle it herself, but in his shadow, her strength had felt like a fragile pretense. She began to trust his judgment, recognizing the fierce protective instincts that lay beneath his hard, demanding exterior. He wasn't just solving a problem, he was protecting her, and she found herself yielding to it, a profound sense of safety blooming in her chest. Late one evening, long after her staff had left and the city lights twinkled outside her panoramic window, Diana was slumped over her workstation, exhausted. She had been perfecting a new recipe, driven by the desire to meet Gabriel's unspoken standards, and the hours had slipped away. Her head rested on her arms, surrounded by the sweet scent of chocolate and vanilla, sleep pulling her under. She felt a gentle, firm touch on her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open to see Gabriel standing over her, his formidable presence softened slightly in the dim light of the kitchen. He didn't chide her for overworking. Instead, he simply, carefully lifted her into his arms. Diana gasped softly, surprised by the sudden tender strength. She was so small against him, nestled securely against his broad chest as he carried her through the quiet hallways, the rhythmic beat of his heart a steady comfort. He took her directly to her apartment, laying her gently on her bed, pulling the covers over her. When she woke the next morning, the lingering scent of his presence still in the air, a warm meal sat on her nightstand, still covered and warm. Beside it, glinting in the morning light, was a small, delicate gold bracelet. It was shaped like a tiny whisk, intricately detailed, a silent acknowledgement of her passion, a beautiful, tangible mark of his claim. He demanded much, but he gave more. And in that simple, powerful gesture, Diana felt cherished, utterly safe, and undeniably completely his. Diana had fully established her new pastry business within Gabriel's formidable building, a gleaming testament to his power and her undeniable talent. Diana's Sweet Nothings had been reborn as an exclusive high-end patisserie serving Gabriel's elite clientele. Her delicate macarons, her intricate tarts, and her impossibly light cupcakes were no longer just a small town's delight. They were quickly gaining renown among the city's most discerning palates. She still missed the familiar creak of her old shop's floorboards, the warmth of the worn brick. But her new reality offered an undeniable sense of safety and stability. The ever-present hum of the building, the constant invisible security, wrapped around her like a protective cloak. From her state-of-the-art kitchen, Diana often caught glimpses of Gabriel's world. She would hear the low murmur of his intense calls through the soundproofed walls, see the fleeting images of powerful men in expensive suits being ushered into his office, sense the unspoken weight of his authority. It was a world of sharp edges, ruthless decisions, and immense power, underscored by a dangerous undercurrent she couldn't quite name. She was acutely aware of how much she stood out in it all, a soft, bright spot of sugar and warmth amidst the stark, unyielding architecture of his empire. Her initial apprehension about his demanding control had slowly begun to morph into a quiet, almost addictive comfort. She found herself leaning into his powerful authority, her resistance softening with each passing day. One afternoon, a new client, an older man with an overly familiar smile, lingered a little too long at her counter, his gaze lingering on her with an uncomfortably possessive glint. He made a comment about her sweetness that sent a shiver of unease down Diana's spine. Before she could even formulate a polite dismissal, Gabriel appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, his presence a sudden, chilling shadow. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even touch the man. His interjection was chillingly polite, a few quiet words spoken with such absolute certainty, such underlying menace that the client's smile instantly vanished. The man stammered an apology and scurried away, practically tripping over himself in his haste to escape Gabriel's piercing stare. Diana watched him go, then looked up at Gabriel, her heart still thrumming. That flash of possessiveness, which once would have alarmed her, now felt like a shield, strong and impenetrable. She realized that his control, far from being oppressive, was a deliberate, unwavering act of protection. It was a promise, made manifest in his powerful presence, that no one would ever dare to disrespect her, or worse, harm her, while she was under his watchful eye. She began to show her quiet appreciation in small ways. She would leave him a perfectly crafted almond croissant on his desk, or a delicate lemon tart, knowing he preferred citrus. She never saw him eat them, never heard a word of thanks, but she noticed. She noticed the slight softening around his eyes when he encountered her later in the day, the way his gaze would linger a moment longer on her face. It was a subtle acknowledgement, a silent communication that spoke volumes more than words ever could. He was a man of few soft expressions, but Diana was learning to read the language of his unspoken gestures, of his possessive stares, and his protective instincts. The age gap that had once felt so vast, the stinging memory of his teenage rejection, began to fade into the background. In its place, a new bond deepened between them, built not on childish adoration, but on her growing trust and his unwavering protection. She was his, undeniably, completely. And in the formidable, sometimes frightening shadow of Gabriel Moretti, Diana found a sanctuary she hadn't known she desperately needed. The quiet hum of the high-rise had become Diana's new normal, a constant backdrop to the gentle sounds of her whisk against batter, the precise click of her piping bag. She was absorbed in designing a new line of delicate petit fours, her mind a peaceful haven of sugar and artistry, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost dismissed it, but a fleeting curiosity made her answer. "Diana, my dear. Julian here. I hope I'm not disturbing your culinary genius." Julian's voice, smooth and charming, instantly brought a flicker of annoyance. He had tried to contact her a few times since her relocation, always with the same light, insistent tone, always deflected by Gabriel's staff. "Mr. Moretti has made it clear that all business inquiries go through his office, Julian," Diana replied, her voice firm, though she felt a slight tremor of discomfort. She didn't like being rude, but she also understood the unspoken rules of Gabriel's world. "Ah, yes, the formidable Mr. Moretti," Julian chuckled, a sound that grated on her nerves. "But this isn't just business, Diana. It's an opportunity for you, for your unique vision, a chance to truly soar, unfettered by certain heavy-handed influences." There was a subtle insinuation in his words, a clear attempt to sow doubt about Gabriel's protection. Before she could form a reply, her phone was gently but firmly taken from her hand. Gabriel stood beside her, his presence a sudden, formidable wall. She hadn't even heard him approach, his eyes cold and hard, fixed on the phone. "This call is terminated," he stated, his voice a low growl into the receiver. He ended the call without waiting for a response and placed the phone back on her counter, his gaze now sweeping over her. "He tried to reach you again," she said, her voice small. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "He won't again." He turned, walking to the large observation window that overlooked the city, his back to her, yet his presence still commanding the room. "Julian Davies is a front, Diana," he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. "He works for a syndicate, a criminal organization targeting my territory in this city." Diana's breath hitched. A criminal syndicate. The words were jarring, alien to her world of flour and sugar. Her mind scrambled to process the information. Julian, with his charming smile and seemingly innocent proposals, was a part of something dark and dangerous. It felt like a sudden, sickening plunge into a cold reality. Gabriel turned back, his eyes piercing her, reading every flicker of fear in her expression. "They see your bakery, your presence here, as a potential weakness, leverage against me." He didn't elaborate, didn't offer graphic details, but the weight of his words, the sheer gravity of his tone was enough. She didn't need to know the specifics, she understood the implication. She was a target. A cold dread settled deep in her stomach, eclipsing the lingering unease she'd felt about Gabriel's control. This wasn't about stifling her independence. It was about protecting her from a very real, very terrifying threat. She suddenly understood the true cost of operating in Gabriel Moretti's world and the immense, unspoken burden he carried. "You are to have no contact with him, or anyone not approved by my security team," Gabriel commanded, his voice hardening. It wasn't a request, it was an absolute decree. He moved with purpose, his focus solely on her safety. "We are intensifying all security protocols. Personal guards will be assigned to you, effective immediately. Your movements outside this building will be strictly limited and always accompanied." Diana felt the invisible walls of her golden cage close even tighter, but this time there was no resentment, no urge to fight, only a profound sense of relief, a deep, primal gratitude. The tension that had coiled in her stomach was no longer a struggle against his will, but a fear of the external danger he was shielding her from. She looked at him, at the unwavering resolve in his eyes, the formidable strength in his posture, and she knew with absolute certainty that he would keep her safe. "I understand," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, but firm in its commitment. She trusted him, implicitly. In the face of such a dark, unseen threat, his dominance wasn't an imposition, it was a fortress. She was no longer just Diana, the baker. She was Diana, under Gabriel Moretti's formidable, unwavering protection, and in that terrifying, exhilarating realization, she found a strange, addictive peace. The soft glow of the city lights outside Diana's panoramic windows did little to ease the tightening knot in her stomach. The air in Gabriel Moretti's high-rise, usually a serene hum of efficiency, now thrummed with a palpable tension. The syndicate, an unseen, insidious entity, was becoming frighteningly real. Strange cars, sleek and dark like Gabriel's own, were seen lingering near the building's perimeter, their occupants faceless threats. Whispers, hushed and urgent, reached Diana even in her quiet kitchen. Reports of minor accidents at Gabriel's other businesses, veiled warnings delivered with chilling precision. Gabriel's demeanor, already formidable, had hardened into something even more unyielding. His jaw was perpetually set, his eyes, those piercing grey eyes, holding a dangerous glint that spoke of sleepless nights and ruthless calculations. His focus was singular, absolute, neutralizing the threat, protecting his empire, and she knew, protecting her. He worked tirelessly. The door to his executive office often left ajar, just enough for Diana to glimpse the array of screens displaying surveillance feeds, the stacks of intelligence reports, the constant low-voiced conversations with his security detail. He was a general on the battlefield, and she, a small, vulnerable civilian, was inexplicably caught in his war. Diana, though undeniably frightened by the escalating danger, found herself not questioning him, not once. The urge to argue, to assert her independence, had withered under the harsh light of reality. She watched him, seeing the immense burden he carried, the relentless pressure of a world she could barely comprehend. Her fear was not of him, but for him, and for what might happen if he failed. She followed his instructions without hesitation, moving through the building with her assigned personal guard, accepting the limitations on her freedom as necessary shields. There was a strange, undeniable strength she found in her submission to his control, a quiet power in trusting him completely. She understood, with a clarity that both chilled and comforted her, that his current harshness, his unrelenting demands, were born from a fierce, desperate need to keep her safe. It was a terrifying form of devotion, and she found herself clinging to it. One afternoon, as Diana was carefully arranging a display of miniature cakes, she heard voices from Gabriel's office. The door was slightly ajar, and the deep, resonant tones of Gabriel's consigliere, a man named Marco, reached her. "Sir, with the increasing directness of their threats, perhaps it would be wise to send Diana away, temporarily, for her safety." Marco's voice was calm, logical, yet the suggestion sent a tremor through Diana. Send her away, back to her vulnerable little shop, back to being an easy target. The thought filled her with cold dread. There was a moment of silence, thick and heavy, before Gabriel's voice cut through the air, colder than any winter wind, utterly devoid of compromise. "Absolutely not." The words, though simple, resonated with an unyielding finality that vibrated through Diana's bones. "She belongs by my side," Gabriel continued, his voice dropping to a low growl that held a chilling possessiveness. "Under my direct protection. She is mine, Marco. I will not let her out of my sight." Diana froze, a macaron halfway to its delicate pedestal, her breath hitched. She had been worried about being sent away, about being deemed a liability. But Gabriel's rejection of the idea, his raw, unequivocal declaration, struck her with the force of a physical blow. He didn't just want her safe, he wanted her with him. He saw her not as a burden to be removed, but as something to be guarded, fiercely, personally. A surge of possessive warmth bloomed in her chest, chasing away the lingering fear. It was a dizzying, exhilarating sensation. In that moment, listening to his unshakable command, hearing him claim her with such absolute conviction, all her remaining doubts dissolved. The rejection she'd carried for years, the sting of being dismissed as childish, faded into nothingness. She was not a joke, not a weakness. She was his, and in his powerful, dangerous world, That meant everything. It solidified her trust, forging an unbreakable link between them that felt more potent, more profound than any gentle affection. She was safe, yes, but more than that. She was claimed, and in the face of the encroaching shadows, that knowledge felt like the strongest shield of all. The escalating pressure from the syndicate was no longer a distant threat. It was a cold hand reaching into Diana's meticulously organized world. One morning, as she arrived at the loading dock of Gabriel's high-rise, ready to oversee a delivery of fresh ingredients, she was met with a sickening sight. Her new, pristine delivery van, emblazoned with the elegant logo of Diana's Sweet Nothings, sat with its tires slashed, a jagged, angry, spray-painted message across its side. "He can't protect everything." A gasp tore from Diana's throat, and her assigned guard immediately stepped forward, shielding her from the full view, his hand on the communicator in his ear. The message was clear, chillingly personal. They knew about her, and they were willing to touch what was hers to get to Gabriel. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The fear was raw, visceral, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Later that day, the high-rise thrummed with a different kind of energy. It was a silence, heavy and charged, punctuated by hushed conversations and the urgent click of Gabriel's security team moving with grim purpose. Diana didn't see Gabriel's retaliation, but she felt its tremors. The air around him was thick with a dangerous intensity, his already formidable presence magnified into something truly terrifying. His jaw was set like granite. His eyes, when they met hers, burned with an icy fire that promised retribution. She saw the fear in the faces of his staff, the subtle deferential movements, the way they avoided his gaze. News channels murmured about unrelated incidents affecting rival organizations across the city, their operations suddenly crippled, their key figures discreetly disappearing. Diana knew, with a chilling certainty, that these were not unrelated. This was Gabriel's hand, swift and brutal, delivering his message. This wasn't the gentle, innocent love she had once yearned for as a girl, not the kind of romantic protection found in stories. This was raw power, unyielding ruthlessness, a dark, dangerous force that crushed anything that dared to threaten what was his. And she was his. She understood, with a clarity that both awed and frightened her, the immense price of his protection. He wasn't just shielding her, he was waging a war to keep her safe, and the cost was measured in the fear of others, in the dismantling of his enemies. The escalating danger weighed heavily on Diana's shoulders, pressing down until she felt breathless. The hum of the building, once a comfort, now felt like the low growl of a predator. She needed an anchor, something solid in the swirling chaos. She found herself walking towards Gabriel's office, her steps hesitant but determined. She wasn't going to defy him, wasn't going to argue. She was simply going to lean into the undeniable strength he offered, the only strength capable of standing against the darkness that now encroached on her world. He was at his desk, bathed in the cool light of multiple screens, his face a mask of grim determination. He looked up as she entered, his eyes immediately assessing her, searching for any sign of distress. "Diana," he said, his voice a low, steadying rumble. She walked closer, stopping just before his massive desk, feeling small and vulnerable in its shadow. "The van," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "The message." She trailed off, unable to articulate the fear, the sickening feeling of being targeted. Her gaze met his, and in his unwavering strength she found a strange, compelling solace. "Thank you," she managed, the words quiet but heartfelt. "Thank you for protecting me." Her vulnerability was a stark contrast to his unyielding power, a soft plea in the face of his formidable presence. Gabriel rose from his chair, his height suddenly towering over her. He moved around the desk, stopping directly in front of her. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his gaze intense, possessive, yet something in their depths softened, almost imperceptibly. Then his large hand reached out, cupping the back of her head, his thumb brushing gently against her jawline. He pulled her gently forward into a brief, fierce embrace. Diana melted into his strength, her head resting against his broad chest, the steady beat of his heart a powerful rhythm against her ear. It was a rare, fleeting moment of physical comfort, a silent promise. She felt utterly encompassed, completely safe. In that brief, silent hold, he confirmed her place by his side, not just as a baker, but as the woman he would protect, no matter the cost, no matter the danger. She was his, and in his terrifying, undeniable power, she found her peace. The high-rise building, usually so contained, still thrummed with the aftershocks of Gabriel's retaliation. Diana had not seen the violence, but she felt its lingering presence in the hushed tones of the security team, the grim set of Gabriel's jaw, the sudden, respectful fear in the eyes of everyone who crossed his path. The syndicate, though wounded, was not yet defeated, and the air remained heavy with an unspoken tension, a readiness for the next strike. Diana moved through her gleaming kitchen, the rhythmic kneading of dough, a small grounding comfort against the unsettling atmosphere. She clung to Gabriel's protection like a lifeline, her trust in him hardening with every passing day. One afternoon, a sharp, angry murmur drew Diana's attention from her delicate pastry work. Gabriel's office door, usually a sealed barrier, was ajar. She heard his voice, a low, dangerous rumble, laced with an unfamiliar fury. Marco, his consigliere, was speaking in urgent, clipped tones. Diana couldn't make out all the words, but snippets pierced through the quiet. Compromised. Surveillance. Dubois. Diana froze, her hands still in the flour. Dubois. Mr. Dubois, her kindly landlord, the man who had always brought her fresh flowers for her shop. A cold prickle of unease snaked down her spine. Why would his name be mentioned in such a tense conversation? She edged closer, drawn by an irresistible, horrifying curiosity. She could now hear Gabriel clearly, his voice like chipped ice. He sold her lease to them and promised to deliver her to them if they let him live. The words struck Diana like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. Mr. Dubois not just sold the lease, but promised to hand her over. Her world, already shaken by the syndicate's threats, tilted sickeningly. The betrayal was so profound, so utterly callous, that it took her breath away. Someone she had trusted, someone who had always seemed so gentle and kind, had viewed her as nothing more than a bargaining chip, a pawn to save his own skin. The horror was suffocating, making her feel utterly exposed, utterly alone, save for the formidable man in the next room. Gabriel's anger was a palpable force, radiating from his office. He wasn't just angry at the betrayal of his security or his territory. He was furious on her behalf. He was protecting her, and someone she had trusted had tried to undermine that protection in the most insidious way possible. Then his voice softened, though the underlying current of raw emotion remained. It was directed not at Marco, but seemed to carry, almost inadvertently, towards Diana, as if he needed to articulate a truth he had long kept guarded. "You want to know why I rejected her, Marco." Gabriel's voice was low, raw, a sound Diana had never heard from him before. "Because I was already knee-deep in this world, because I knew the moment I brought her into my life I'd be dragging her into a darkness she didn't deserve. I knew it would get her killed." Diana gasped, a silent choke sound. The air seemed to leave her lungs. The tarnished ring box, the childish humiliation, the deep-seated ache of rejection. It all rushed back, but instantly it was transformed. It wasn't because she was a joke. It wasn't because he thought her feelings were insignificant. It was because he had been protecting her even then. He had loved her enough, even at that young age, to push her away, to ensure she remained safe from the dangerous currents of his life. Tears hot and unexpected, pricked at Diana's eyes. The sting of that old wound, which had festered for years, suddenly vanished, replaced by a profound, overwhelming understanding. He hadn't been cruel. He had been sacrificing his own desires, his own burgeoning feelings, for her safety. He had carried that burden, that secret act of protection, for years. The realization settled deep within her, a warm, steadying weight. It wasn't a gentle love, not in the traditional sense, but it was a fierce, unwavering devotion that had spanned years, even across a rejection. Her trust in him, already absolute, now deepened into something unbreakable, something almost sacred. The world might be full of betrayals and dangers, but Gabriel Moretti, the powerful, terrifying man who had claimed her, had always, in his own formidable way, been her protector. And in that terrifying, exhilarating truth, Diana found not just safety, but a profound, unshakable respect, and a love that went beyond mere affection. The high-rise building, usually so contained, still thrummed with the aftershocks of Gabriel's retaliation. Diana had not seen the violence, but she felt its lingering presence in the hushed tones of the security team, the grim set of Gabriel's jaw, the sudden, respectful fear in the eyes of everyone who crossed his path. The syndicate, though wounded, was not yet defeated, and the air remained heavy with an unspoken tension, a readiness for the next strike. Diana moved through her gleaming kitchen, the rhythmic kneading of dough, a small, grounding comfort against the unsettling atmosphere. She clung to Gabriel's protection like a lifeline, her trust in him hardening with every passing day. One afternoon, a sharp, angry murmur drew Diana's attention from her delicate pastry work. Gabriel's office door, usually a sealed barrier, was ajar. She heard his voice, a low, dangerous rumble, laced with an unfamiliar fury. Marco, his consigliere, was speaking in urgent, clipped tones. Diana couldn't make out all the words, but snippets pierced through the quiet. Compromised, surveillance, Dubois. Diana froze, her hands still in the flour. Dubois? Mr. Dubois, her kindly landlord, the man who had always brought her fresh flowers for her shop. A cold prickle of unease snaked down her spine. Why would his name be mentioned in such a tense conversation? She edged closer, drawn by an irresistible, horrifying curiosity. She could now hear Gabriel clearly, his voice like chipped ice. He sold her lease to them, and promised to deliver her to them if they let him live. The words struck Diana like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. Mr. Dubois. Not just sold the lease, but promised to hand her over. Her world, already shaken by the syndicate's threats, tilted sickeningly. The betrayal was so profound, so utterly callous, that it took her breath away. Someone she had trusted, someone who had always seemed so gentle and kind, had viewed her as nothing more than a bargaining chip, a pawn to save his own skin. The horror was suffocating, making her feel utterly exposed, utterly alone, save for the formidable man in the next room. Gabriel's anger was a palpable force, radiating from his office. He wasn't just angry at the betrayal of his security or his territory. He was furious on her behalf. He was protecting her, and someone she had trusted had tried to undermine that protection in the most insidious way possible. Then his voice softened, though the underlying current of raw emotion remained. It was directed not at Marco, but seemed to carry, almost inadvertently, towards Diana, as if he needed to articulate a truth he had long kept guarded. "You want to know why I rejected her, Marco?" Gabriel's voice was low, raw, a sound Diana had never heard from him before. "Because I was already knee-deep in this world. Because I knew the moment I brought her into my life, I'd be dragging her into a darkness she didn't deserve. I knew it would get her killed." Diana gasped, a silent, choked sound. The air seemed to leave her lungs, the tarnished ringbox, the childish humiliation, the deep-seated ache of rejection. It all rushed back, but instantly it was transformed. It wasn't because she was a joke. It wasn't because he thought her feelings were insignificant. It was because he had been protecting her even then. He had loved her enough, even at that young age, to push her away, to ensure she remained safe from the dangerous currents of his life. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at Diana's eyes. The sting of that old wound which had festered for years suddenly vanished, replaced by a profound, overwhelming understanding. He hadn't been cruel. He had been sacrificing his own desires, his own burgeoning feelings for her safety. He had carried that burden, that secret act of protection, for years. The realization settled deep within her, a warm, steadying weight. It wasn't a gentle love, not in the traditional sense, but it was a fierce, unwavering devotion that had spanned years, even across a rejection. Her trust in him, already absolute, now deepened into something unbreakable, something almost sacred. The world might be full of betrayals and dangers, but Gabriel Moretti, the powerful, terrifying man who had claimed her, had always, in his own formidable way, been her protector. And in that terrifying, exhilarating truth, Diana found not just safety, but a profound, unshakable respect, and a love that went beyond mere affection. The high-rise building, usually so contained, now thrummed with a different kind of energy. It wasn't the frantic, anxious buzz of a few days ago, but a low, powerful hum, like a sleeping giant finally stirring. Gabriel was rarely seen, disappearing into the depths of his command center, but Diana felt his presence everywhere, a constant, formidable weight that both intimidated and grounded her. The air was charged with a quiet intensity, the unspoken understanding that a storm had been unleashed, and Gabriel Moretti was at its terrifying eye. From her kitchen, Diana would catch snippets of news reports on the screens scattered throughout the building's common areas. The syndicate, once a shadowy, pervasive threat, was now being openly discussed in hushed tones, its operations suddenly crippled, its key figures mysteriously neutralized. Headlines spoke of sudden raids, financial collapses, and prominent arrests, all pointing to a decisive, brutal dismantling. The city, which had braced for chaos, now held its breath in a mixture of fear and awe, realizing that a new, even more formidable power had asserted its dominance. Diana knew with chilling certainty that this was all Gabriel's doing. His silence, his grim resolve, spoke volumes more than any public statement. He had moved with the efficiency of a predator, eliminating the threat without a single direct word to her about the specifics. Diana stayed by his side, or rather, remained within the safe confines of his orbit, never questioning his methods. She didn't need to know the details of the violence, the ruthless strategies, the precise ways he had decimated his enemies. She understood, with a deep instinctive clarity, that such brutality was not just necessary for their survival, but an inherent part of his world. He was a force of nature, and she was simply caught in his powerful current, held safe within its eddy. She watched him, seeing the immense, controlled fury that drove him, the unwavering certainty in his eyes. It was a terrifying sight, yet she found herself drawn to the sheer, unbridled power of him, recognizing the lengths he would go to protect what was his. The softer, gentler love she once imagined now seemed weak, insufficient against the darkness he faced daily. His ruthlessness was her shield, his strength her sanctuary. One afternoon, the subdued atmosphere in her kitchen shifted. Diana was carefully piping ganache onto a new batch of truffles when she felt a shadow fall over her workstation. She looked up, her heart giving a familiar lurch, to find Gabriel standing there. The intensity in his eyes remained, but the raw, punishing tension had eased, replaced by a quiet, dangerous satisfaction. He surveyed her, then the delicate creations before her, a subtle acknowledgement of her work. He didn't speak immediately, simply reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. Diana's breath hitched, a faint memory of her own tarnished ring box flickering through her mind. This, however, was different. He opened it, revealing a heavy gold pendant. It was a custom piece, intricately designed, featuring a stylized version of his family's crest, a formidable lion, its gaze as piercing as his own, intertwined with the delicate outline of a whisk. It was a breathtaking piece, powerful and elegant, a stark blend of their two worlds. "For you," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of question. He didn't ask if she liked it or if she would wear it. He simply presented it, an undeniable command in his gesture. He took the pendant from the box, his large, warm fingers brushing against her neck as he fastened it. The weight of the gold settled against her skin, cool at first, then warming with her body heat, a constant, tangible presence. Diana reached up, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold metal. It was more than jewelry. It was a visible statement, a mark. It was his crest, his symbol of power, now intertwined with hers, a permanent, undeniable declaration to the world. She was not just under his protection, she was claimed. The pendant was a heavy, beautiful chain, binding her to him, marking her as irrevocably his. A powerful surge of emotion swelled within her, possessiveness, safety, an almost dizzying sense of belonging. The quiet, unspoken message was clear. She was cherished, protected, and definitively off-limits. She looked up at him, her eyes shining, and a silent, profound understanding passed between them. In that moment, she knew she had never been safer, never more completely seen, never more truly belonged. The air in the high-rise had changed again. It was no longer charged with the aftermath of Gabriel's brutal retaliation, but with a new, sharper tension, like the taut string of a bow pulled back to its limit. The syndicate, though severely wounded, was desperate. Diana heard the whispers, saw the grim set of Gabriel's jaw, understood that they were cornered animals, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. They would make one last, reckless move, and she knew with a cold certainty that settled deep in her bones that she would be their target. Gabriel, however, moved with an almost terrifying calm. He had anticipated their desperation. Her new, beautiful bakery, the one that had become her sanctuary, was now being transformed, not just for a relaunch, but for a confrontation. She watched as his security team meticulously installed reinforced panels behind the elegant display cases, subtly reinforced the back entrance, and discreetly positioned surveillance equipment. The bakery, usually filled with the sweet scent of vanilla, now carried the faint metallic tang of new construction and the quiet, purposeful movements of men preparing for battle. Diana didn't question him. She didn't even feel the need to ask for details. Her trust in him was absolute, forged in the fires of betrayal and danger. She understood. She understood that the lavish relaunch party they had planned, meant to draw the city's elite, was also a lure. A stage, a meticulously prepared trap for the syndicate to walk into, a final act in Gabriel's unwavering protection of her. Her demeanor, despite the escalating tension, remained remarkably calm. She moved through the preparations with a quiet focus, her hands busy with the final touches on bespoke cakes and delicate pastries. She ensured every detail was perfect, every display inviting, every invitation sent. She assisted wherever she could, her presence a steady, grounding force amidst the controlled chaos. There was no fear in her actions, only a profound sense of purpose, a complete alignment with Gabriel's will. She was an integral part of his plan, and in that shared understanding, she found a strange, powerful serenity. She was his, and she would stand by him, even on the precipice of danger. The night before the party, the high-rise was eerily quiet. Most of the security team was already in position, the building a silent, coiled spring. Diana found herself in the bakery long after everyone else had left, bathed in the soft glow of the display lights. She was meticulously placing tiny sugar flowers on the centerpiece cake, her movements precise, almost meditative. It was a beautiful creation, a symbol of hope and resilience. But she knew its true purpose was far darker. She didn't hear Gabriel approach. She only felt his presence, a sudden powerful warmth at her back, a familiar anchor in the quiet. He simply stood there watching her, his gaze a palpable weight. She finished placing the last delicate petal, then slowly turned to face him. His eyes, usually so sharp and unyielding, held a deep, possessive intensity, a raw vulnerability she rarely glimpsed. He took a step closer, then another, until he was directly in front of her, eclipsing the soft lights, making her feel small and utterly encompassed. His large hands reached out, cupping her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheekbones. "No one," he began, his voice a low growl, rough with emotion. "No one will ever touch you, Diana." His eyes burned into hers, a fierce, primal promise. "You are mine." The words resonated deep within her, a powerful chord striking a primal response. The world outside, the looming danger, the desperate syndicate. It all faded into insignificance. All that mattered was Gabriel, his strength, his absolute claim. She melted into his embrace as he pulled her fiercely against his chest, her arms instinctively wrapping around his waist. His body was a hard, unyielding fortress, a solid shield against the darkness. She buried her face against his shoulder, inhaling the scent of him. Expensive cologne, a hint of steel, and something uniquely Gabriel, utterly secure in his power, in his unwavering protection. Diana felt a profound, intoxicating peace. She was his, completely and irrevocably, and in that truth, she was invincible. The bakery's relaunch party was a dazzling spectacle, a vibrant symphony of New Orleans elite. Crystal flutes chimed with laughter, polished shoes glided across the floor, and the air hummed with lively conversation. Diana, radiant in a cream-colored dress that shimmered under the chandeliers, moved among her guests, a nervous excitement fluttering in her chest. Her creations, miniature works of art, vanished from silver trays almost as quickly as they appeared, each bite met with murmurs of delight. Pride swelled within her, a fragile, sweet thing, and for a fleeting moment the looming shadow of danger seemed to recede. Gabriel, a dark, imposing figure, stood at a strategic vantage point near the grand entrance, his presence a silent, formidable anchor in the bustling room. His gaze rarely left her, sweeping over her as she spoke to guests, then meticulously scanning the faces in the crowd. When she passed near him, his large hand would settle subtly on the small of her back, a possessive, grounding weight that sent a shiver of both nerves and profound safety through her. It was a silent claim, a constant reminder that even in this joyous moment, she was under his unwavering watch. She felt his vigilance like a physical force, a tightly coiled spring always ready. Suddenly, a crashing sound from the back alley ripped through the festive atmosphere, sharp and violent, like glass shattering under a heavy boot. The laughter died, replaced by a stunned silence that thickened into a collective gasp of fear. Diana's head snapped towards the sound, her heart leaping into her throat. Then the back door burst open with brutal force, splintering wood. 3 men, hulking figures with hard, expressionless faces, stormed in, their movements swift and practiced. The glint of metal in their hands, the unmistakable shape of firearms, sent a wave of pure terror through the room. A woman screamed, high-pitched and raw, and the elegant party dissolved into chaos. People shrieked, scrambling, diving for cover under tables, their panicked movements a blur. Diana stood frozen, her blood turning to ice, her eyes, wide with horror, locked onto the lead enforcer. His gaze, cold and direct, was fixed on her, cutting through the pandemonium. There was no doubt. She was their target. Her legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot, a primal fear seizing her. Just as the man took a menacing step forward, a sudden blinding force slammed into her. It wasn't a gentle push. It was an act of brutal, protective power. Gabriel, his hand, iron hard, shoved her violently downwards and forwards, sending her sprawling behind the reinforced counter. She landed with a breathless thump, disoriented, her vision momentarily blurred. Before she could even register the shock, Gabriel was there, his massive body a solid, impenetrable wall between her and the raging storm. She was pressed against the cool, hard surface of the counter, shielded, completely hidden from the chaos. She could hear the frantic shouts, the terrified cries of the guests, but her world had shrunk to the formidable presence of Gabriel's back, his broad shoulders tensed, his entire being radiating feral, unbridled fury. Through a narrow gap between his arm and the counter, Diana caught a terrifying glimpse of the unfolding violence. Gabriel moved with a speed that defied his size, a blur of controlled power. One of the enforcers, attempting to flank him, lunged forward. Gabriel didn't hesitate. With a roar that vibrated through Diana's very bones, a sound utterly primal and savage, he twisted, grabbing the man's head. There was a sickening crunch, a sharp, terrible crack, as he smashed the enforcer's face into the elegant display case filled with delicate pastries. Glass exploded outwards in a glittering shower, truffles scattering like dark jewels, the man slumping lifelessly. Another shot rang out, impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Diana flinched, instinctively pressing herself harder against the counter, her hands flying to cover her ears. She heard a choked cry, a thud. She didn't see the bullet leave Gabriel's hand, but she saw the third enforcer, who had been aiming his weapon towards her hidden position, stumble backward, a dark bloom spreading across his chest before he crashed through the front window, showering the street outside with jagged shards. The scent of gunpowder filled the air, acrid and metallic. The screams had subsided, replaced by whimpers and the ragged breathing of those still cowering. Diana, still pressed against the counter, could feel Gabriel's chest heaving against her back, his breath coming in short, harsh gasps. His body remained her impenetrable shield, protecting her from the horror, from the lingering danger. She was terrified, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but beneath the fear, an overwhelming sense of safety bloomed. He had reacted with a brutal, visceral efficiency that defied human comprehension. He hadn't thought, he had simply acted, a dangerous, magnificent predator protecting his own. She was utterly helpless, utterly dependent, yet completely safe in the terrifying, powerful shadow of his protection. He had claimed her, and he would tear the world apart to keep her. The thought, in its raw, primal truth, was addictive. The bakery was a wreck. Shattered glass glittered like malevolent diamonds across the floor, crunching under the heavy boots of the arriving police. Overturned tables lay scattered, their elegant cloths now stained and ripped. The lingering scent of gunpowder hung thick in the air, a harsh counterpoint to the ghost of sweet vanilla. Sirens wailed outside, painting the street in flashing red and blue, their mournful cries echoing the terror that had just ripped through the once festive room. Diana remained pressed against the counter, Gabriel's body still a formidable, unyielding shield between her and the chaos. She could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his heart against her back, the slight tremor in his muscles as his adrenaline began to recede. He was breathing heavily, but his stance remained resolute, utterly protective. Uniformed officers flooded the room, their faces grim, their movements quick and efficient. They moved around the bodies of the fallen enforcers, their eyes scanning the stunned, cowering guests. Soon, a stern-faced detective approached, his gaze sharp and accusatory as it landed on Gabriel's broad back. "Mr. Moretti," the detective's voice was clipped, official, "we need to separate you from Ms. Reed. We have some questions about what occurred here." He tried to gently but firmly take Diana's arm, attempting to pull her away. Diana flinched, not from the detective's touch, but from the sudden, unwelcome separation from Gabriel's protective warmth. She instinctively pressed herself closer to Gabriel's back, her fingers clenching the fabric of his expensive suit. The world outside his immediate presence still felt too vast, too dangerous. "Miss Reed," The detective continued, his voice softening with what he clearly thought was concern. "It's imperative you cooperate. Mr. Moretti's actions were extreme, reckless. Given the nature of this incident and his known associations, it would be in your best interest to press charges and cut all ties with him. We can offer you protection." Diana slowly, carefully began to straighten, emerging from behind Gabriel's shield. Her limbs felt heavy, still trembling from the shock. But her mind was clear, focused with an unwavering intensity. She looked at the detective, then her gaze drifted to Gabriel. He hadn't moved, but she felt his tension, the raw, protective fire that still burned in his eyes as he watched the scene, as he watched her. She saw the ferocity that had saved her life, the brutal efficiency that had shattered glass and silenced threats. She remembered the betrayal of Mr. Dubois, the chilling realization that the gentle love she once yearned for was utterly insufficient against the darkness of this world. She remembered Gabriel's confession, his years of secret protection, his unwavering claim. Every instinct, every fiber of her being screamed for her to stay exactly where she was. She reached out, her hand finding Gabriel's. His fingers were strong, unyielding, and in a silent, powerful declaration, she intertwined hers with his. Their hands, his large and scarred, hers small and soft, locked together, an unbreakable connection. Then Diana turned to face the detective, her gaze sweeping over the remaining patrons, who were slowly, cautiously, emerging from their hiding places, their eyes wide with shock and morbid curiosity. Her voice, though still slightly hoarse with adrenaline, was clear, steady, and utterly resolute. "I am staying with the man I once proposed to," she declared, her words echoing through the damaged bakery. Her eyes met Gabriel's, and she saw the subtle softening of his gaze, the possessive satisfaction that flickered there, even amidst the chaos. "He protected me. He always will." Her public choice, her unwavering alignment with him, hung in the air, a powerful, undeniable truth. Gabriel's grip on her hand tightened, firm and absolute, a silent promise of forever. Outside, the remaining syndicate members, who had perhaps lingered, watching, listening, now scattered into the New Orleans night. Their threat, utterly neutralized by Gabriel's brutal efficiency and Diana's unyielding loyalty, was finally irrevocably gone. She had chosen him, and in that choice, she accepted her place in his dangerous world, utterly safe, utterly claimed. Weeks later, the scent of vanilla and sugar once again filled Diana's bakery, but it was a different aroma now, richer, more complex. Imbued with the quiet hum of resilience, the space itself was transformed, rebuilt from the shattered remnants of that terrifying night. Gleaming new display cases, reinforced with discreet strength, showcased her pastries like jewels. The back entrance, once a vulnerability, was now a fortress, a testament to Gabriel's unwavering commitment to her safety. It was more beautiful, more luxurious, and undeniably more secure than she could have ever imagined. Diana moved through her kitchen with a newfound confidence, her hands busy with flour and sugar, a quiet strength radiating from her. The frantic fear that had once plagued her was gone, replaced by a deep, settled peace. News reports, still crackling occasionally on the small radio in her prep area, confirmed the dismantling of the syndicate. Gabriel Moretti's name, already synonymous with power in New Orleans, now echoed with an even deeper resonance of danger and absolute dominance. He had moved through the city like a silent storm, cleansing it of its threats, ensuring that no one would ever again dare to touch what was his. She was no longer just Diana, the small-town baker who once dreamed of gentle love. She was Diana, Gabriel Moretti's woman, a title that carried an unspoken weight, a quiet reverence, and in some circles, a subtle fear by association. She understood the demands of his world now, the ruthless undercurrents, the necessity of his power, and she accepted them, not with resignation, but willingly, completely. In the formidable shadow of his empire, she had found a profound sense of safety, an unshakable belonging that she hadn't known she desperately craved. It was a shelter built not just of brick and steel, but of his unwavering will, his absolute claim. Gabriel still kept a close watch on her, his possessiveness undiminished, perhaps even amplified by the recent violence. He would appear unannounced, leaning against the doorframe of her kitchen, his dark suit a stark contrast to her flour-dusted apron. His eyes, those piercing grey eyes, would sweep over her, assessing, reassuring himself of her safety, before moving to scan the bakery, every detail registered, every potential threat identified. She felt his presence like a warm, heavy cloak, a constant reminder of her cherished, protected status. One afternoon, a new delivery driver, a young man with an earnest smile, lingered a moment too long at her counter, his gaze openly admiring as he complimented her lemon tarts. Diana offered a polite smile, used to the attention, but before she could even respond, a low growl resonated from just behind her. "Move along." Gabriel's voice was a soft rumble, but it carried an undeniable edge, a territorial warning that sent a shiver down Diana's spine and made the young man's smile falter. He turned, his eyes wide with sudden apprehension, as he took in Gabriel's formidable presence, the sheer, unyielding power radiating from him. The driver stammered an apology, his face flushing, and quickly completed his delivery, retreating with a haste that spoke volumes. Diana didn't need to look at Gabriel to know the look on his face. She felt the possessive heat of his gaze, the tightening of his jaw, the raw, ancient instinct of a protector. His territorial instincts were as strong as ever, a constant, powerful declaration to every man who dared to linger too long near her counter. She was forbidden. She belonged to him. And in that fierce, unwavering claim, Diana felt a profound, exhilarating peace. She was utterly safe, cherished, and irrevocably, completely his. Years later, the scent of fresh bread and rich chocolate was more than just a fragrance. It was the very essence of Diana's triumph, a testament to a life she had meticulously crafted under the formidable shadow of Gabriel Moretti. Her kitchen, a gleaming expanse of state-of-the-art appliances and polished marble, was a permanent fixture, built specifically for her, high above Gabriel's exclusive nightclub in the heart of his riverfront high-rise. It was a sanctuary, a workshop, and a symbol of their unbreakable bond. Diana, her hair often dusted with flour, moved with an easy grace honed by years of practice and a quiet confidence born of absolute security. She was no longer the small-town baker, nervously counting pennies. Diana's sweet nothings had evolved, becoming an institution, her custom cakes and delicate pastries renowned throughout New Orleans' elite circles. Her creations were not just food, they were art, imbued with a touch of her unique, sweet magic. She was a respected figure in her own right, her talent undeniable, but everyone knew her connection to Gabriel Moretti. Her presence, a soft counterpoint to the powerful man who commanded the city below, was a quiet declaration of his claim, her name uttered with the same blend of admiration and wary respect as his own. Downstairs, Gabriel Moretti's name continued to echo with danger and dominance. His empire had only grown, his influence absolute, his presence a silent, undeniable force in the city's underbelly and its glittering heights. He was the man who made the rules, the one whose will was law, the formidable protector whose ruthlessness was legendary. Yet, in their shared world, Diana felt his power not as a weight, but as an unwavering shield. She was safe, cherished, and forever under his unwavering protection, their bond eternal and unbreakable. His possessiveness, once a source of slight apprehension, was now a comforting, constant presence. He still growled, a low, resonant rumble in his chest, at any man who lingered too long near her counter, his piercing grey eyes conveying a clear, territorial warning. It was a familiar ritual, a powerful reminder to the world that she was irrevocably his, a declaration that settled deep in her bones with a profound sense of belonging. But it was in the quiet intimacy of their apartment, in the soft hours after the city had dimmed and the last sweet crumb had been cleared, that Diana witnessed the true depth of his devotion. He, the ruthless CEO, the dangerous man whose name commanded fear and respect, would often find her in her private kitchen, still puttering, lost in the peaceful rhythm of her craft. One particular night, as she stood, tired but content, preparing for the next day, Gabriel walked in. He didn't speak, simply watched her for a long moment, his gaze intense, possessive, yet softened by an unspoken tenderness. He moved closer, his large hands reaching for her apron, the delicate fabric a stark contrast to his powerful fingers. He knelt. On the gleaming, cool tiles of her bakery floor, the most powerful man she knew knelt before her. His head, usually held high, was bowed slightly as he meticulously tied the strings of her apron, his movements gentle, focused. Diana watched him, her heart swelling with an emotion so profound it bordered on reverence. He was the one who commanded, who protected, who claimed, yet in this private moment he yielded to her, to the quiet domesticity of their life. When the apron was secured, his demanding hands didn't pull away. Instead, they moved, cupping her wrists, his thumbs gently stroking the flour from her skin. Then he raised her hands to his lips, kissing away the faint dusting of sugar, a silent, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. His devotion, absolute and unwavering, was a powerful, tangible force, a quiet surrender that proved even the most dominant man knelt before the woman he had claimed as his own. She was safe, utterly cherished, and forever under his unwavering protection, their bond eternal and unbreakable. If you enjoyed this story, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Tales of Power and Desire to keep up with our intense romances.